Great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Aaron Berkby. I'm going to be the facilitator for our panel chat this afternoon. I'm the co-founder of Tribe Global Ventures, which is a VC firm focused on B2B tech companies from across Australia and New Zealand that are seeking to expand into the UK and USA. Personally, I've led or designed 18 trade missions from Australia over to places like the UK, Europe, US and Israel. And I've forgotten the count, but I think there have been 6 missions to the UK so far as part of that. And I am actually also a British citizen, so I do have a bit of a vested interest in the UK market. But on our panel today, we're joined by Paul Webster, who is the Trade Commissioner for New South Wales Trade and Investment based out of London, who has kindly gotten up quite early in the morning to join us. We have Claudia Smith, who's the COO of Apply ID, which is a fintech based out of originally New Zealand, now expanded into Australia and the UK. And Craig O'Kane, the COO of Everledger, an amazing startup that's expanded well into the UK and beyond globally. And sorry, my co-founders are giving me messages saying they didn't know I was a British citizen, so that's news to them. But also Craig spent many years with the Department of International Trade based out of Australia, helping companies expand to the UK and vice versa. And also joined by Maren Eibner, who is our mission leader at Tribe Global Ventures and will be leading again our London mission this coming June. Panel members, I'm going to just get you to expand on your intros a little bit. I gave the quick intro, but I think just contextually for the audience, just to understand your own experience with the UK. Paul, I might kick off with you first, but your own experience of 2 sides of the market, your background and contextually understanding your Australian experience and also how you've been helping companies enter the UK. You just unmuted at the moment, Paul.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Fabulous. There's a trick button. There's 2 mutes to go and click. My Australian background was a banker management consultant, so I was working more at a larger corporate level. So that was one where you can see that things shift across borders much more easily, and things like immigration, etc., was just right, the checking things happen. I then joined the British government, had the pleasure of working with Craig for several years, and then I came to the UK and set up my own business and did everything we tell companies to do, and then find out that wasn't enough. That there's a whole lot of other things that aren't talked about, that are very granular, that need to be done, that, you know, you've got to get your IP protected, because even your brand, because you're going to end up somewhere, sometime, you're going to need to protect it. Getting into even language we use that is really similar, but there are different cultural elements, and understanding how that works between international workforces. Scaling internationally is also, I mean, living that part of the entrepreneur, saying, do I take the risk to grow, or do I get the sale, then grow? And that constant dilemma you have in trying to scale a business. But in the UK, it was one where I've now helped, supported 3,000 businesses to go through the itty bitty bits of setting up offshore. And if you've run into a problem, we've probably helped someone from somewhere in that sector get over that problem. So anything we can use, and also seeing wonderful businesses like Claudia with the persistence and resilience that is required to be successful, not in your own home markets, but any market, whether it speaks English or a foreign language, that you almost start all over again. So I have a lot of time for the entrepreneurs like Claudia, who I've seen do it in their own time in several markets. So that's my background, and happy to help any way I can.
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate that. So just a bit of experience there with 3,000 companies that you've helped, and really good points that we'll be touching on around IP, language, culture, that need for resilience entering the market. Claudia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Paul. It's true. It definitely takes resilience. It's not super easy and straightforward, but I don't think any startup journey ever is. So anyone that's on that journey probably knows it. But bit of background about me. So I used to work originally in corporate strategy, and I did what all Kiwis do. And when I finished uni, after a couple of years work, went to London and worked over in London for about 7 years and got my citizenship. So it's sort of proved quite helpful later. I then moved back to New Zealand and decided to have a family, and thought it was a really good idea to start my own business while having children. So yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the best idea unless you want a really, really busy life. But so I've been on the startup journey, and my business partner and I started Apply ID about 4 years ago. And I think it was our second startup, so it wasn't our sort of first time at doing it. But Apply ID is a digital identity onboarding business. So it uses facial biometrics and data validation to really help organizations transform their onboarding experience to make it a very quick, easy, digital first journey. And we picked up great traction in New Zealand, and the New Zealand market, I think Australia is not quite the same, but it's tiny. So, you can get great scale, great metrics, and everything's going well, but you hit a ceiling pretty quickly in terms of how big you can go. And my business partner and I always had quite big ambitions for what we wanted to do. We actually went on a trade mission, unfortunately not with Tribe, because we hadn't come across them at that stage, but with the Department of International Trade, which is the UK government encouraging businesses to go to the UK. We went way too early, but we learned a lot, and I guess I'll delve into that more. But that's just a little bit of background in terms of, where we've come from. And Apply ID is a big, we've scaled there, we've raised money, and I'll sort of talk more about the lessons we learned on that piece. But that's me, that's who I am, and I will be quiet because I have a tendency to ramble. So apologies.
Awesome, Claudia, thank you. And yeah, looking forward to getting into that journey and the practical tips learned along the way. Craig, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so I'm Craig. I am a Brit. I'm on the panel, so feel free to bash me over the head as all Australians do. I was saying to the others before that I've picked up more of an Australian twang since I've been here now, I think 14 years in total, but 10 of those years whilst I was here, I was locked up on UK soil, so to speak, inside the consulates and the High Commission here in Australia. In terms of my background, I was initially a fund manager in London, so similar to Paul, operating trading in real assets for a number of years, and then moved to Australia. So I've been in Australia for about 14 years in total now. And I then worked for the UK government. So at the UK government for 10 of those years, initially at the British Consulate General in Sydney, and then relocating to the consulate in Brisbane, where I had responsibility very similar to Paul in terms of trade and investment in capital markets as well. So supporting some of the superannuation funds by UK assets over the years, and doing, and I guess going that extra mile, making sure that people know who they can talk to, as well as all the practical information about how to set up a company or a subsidiary or a headco, etc. And I also was lucky enough to go on a mission with Aaron as well. So I've done the whole experience and been over to the UK, I guess, as a bit of a tour guide in parts of the UK, whether that be in Birmingham or Manchester. After I left the UK government, I went across into the Queensland government in the Department of Innovation for a couple of years, where I worked closely with Leanne Kemp, who was the chief entrepreneur at the time. And then subsequently, I've moved across into the chief entrepreneur's company as the COO at Everledger, which is a global blockchain company with a fairly sizable presence in the UK, headquartered out of London in Covent Garden. And then we operate around the world in 5 operational centres as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Craig. Lots there to unpack as well. And Myron, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Maren. As Aaron said, I'm the Global Mission Lead with Tribe Global. Was amazing to take a group of 19 founders to London this year in June. A little bit of my background, I have operated small business, I've managed businesses, I do have a background in marketing, a great passion for target market analysis and segmentation, and really understanding the customer, which of course is a very important part of expanding into a new market and exploring that. And then a big passion for me is event planning, logistics, project management. So bringing those missions to life is really a great enjoyment for me, because we can take away that stress for the participants. We can take away that stress for the businesses, and working with a lot of founders and businesses, and being in the shoes of business operator and owner myself. I can really resonate with the fears that some businesses might go through, some of the worries that founders have before they expand into a market. It surely feels daunting exploring a new market. So if we can take away that stress from them by planning missions, working out the logistics, working out where you should be, in my eyes, basically, we are opening the doors. The businesses, the founders, the participants just have to step through the door. That's sort of where we can shine, and what makes me personally very fulfilled and very happy, and I'm so excited being part of these missions.
Thank you. So let's get into it. Kicking off with why. Why should founders be considering the UK market? So we see a lot naturally gravitate to North America. And Craig, I might kick off with you first. I know you do have to maybe disappear a little bit early. Why should more startup founders be looking at the UK market?
I might say a couple of things, because I don't want to steal too many answers from the other participants. Otherwise, Paul and Claudia will be after me. But there's two main reasons, in my opinion. One, ease. Ease of doing business in terms of transacting in the UK. And I'm sure we can go into this in a bit more detail, as well as to the how you actually perform and undertake business in the UK. But of course, without stating the bleeding obvious, it's the English language and the rule of law is extremely similar. And, without having to do too much, it's an easy market for an Australian company to consider. Now, whether that's a technology company seeking to scale or move into a particular area, or whether it's a goods-based business that make widgets and they want to sell that into the UK, it's not that difficult or tricky in comparison to other countries that you might be considering. So I think I'll just paint that in the biggest picture as possible, just the ease of doing business in the UK. The second one would be around the scale and the size of the market. And, conscious that the UK is now not a member of the European Union after Brexit, it's still in its own right a very large market to do business in. And again, whether that's in the insurance sector, which I'm talking to shortly in about an hour's time, or whether that's in, the fast-moving consumer goods sector, in the UK, it's a significant country in order to have a presence in. And without having a presence in there, you're probably missing a sizable consumer market as well. So I'll leave it at those 2 points, because there's many other things I could say.
That commonality of common law is an interesting one. I heard a stat, and I can't remember the source, but that it was 29% cheaper to do business in the UK than in the US for an Australian-based company, just purely because of that commonality of common law and systems. But Paul, I think from your perspective, so particularly you're based in London right now, why should Aussie founders be looking at the UK?
I'll go through. My first one is simply the size. It's sixth largest economy on earth. It's 67.5 million people, still a fast growing population. Giving you some segmentation of that, 54 million people are over 16, 12 million are over 65, and 13 million are under 16. So if you're in EdTech, there's still half of Australia are at school in the early stages, more than that. In fact, it's It's getting, by the time you add tertiary education and others, if you're looking at the aging population and health tech and those very consistent problems, I could pick up a newspaper from London, Sydney, Auckland, Vancouver, and I couldn't tell you the difference between the headlines I'll be reading. I'm going to have inflation. I'm going to have a central bank raising rates. I'm going to need more efficiency in my school. I'm going to have an aging population that needs innovation for integrated healthcare. I'm going to want more control and regulation on higher risk and sensitive industries like medical and financial. All of those issues, same city in the world, same issues. So if you've got a great product, you can bring it over because those same societal issues are over here too. Some really exciting things I'll bring out from last week's budget. 20 billion per annum in research, up by a third, going into the UK research machinery. 1.6 billion into the early stage, what we call the catalyst elements. We've just had an increase in the SEIS thresholds up to 250,000 now. If you're looking at, if you're in infrastructure transport, 600 billion is going to be done in the next 5 years on infrastructure. We're looking at health CapEx budgets of 36 billion. We're looking at RegTech and another overall, because the UK government has to improve its efficiency, and we are going to see a large investment in the UK for the RegTech firms. We're on banking, financial services, that continues to evolve. I mean, particularly on RegTech, I mean, Claudia's business is a fantastic example of, I can pull up my driver's license from New South Wales and they are still doing paper checks to DVLA to get your driver's license. It's providing its own sub-economy in Swansea. It's ridiculous, and that's the kind of thing that's going to shift in the next 5 years. There is a lot of things the Brits are really good at. Cybersecurity, top 3 in the world, fantastic market. Quantum, they're up there. Sydney is a great complement to it. So there's a lot of really positive energy going on. You're surrounded by the 4th, 7th, 9th, 14th, 17th, 18th and 20th largest economies in the world in a 90-minute flight away. So it's massive. Come and enjoy it. Last thing to call out, I mean, Claudia, I think, is living the dream with a 24/7 service team over here. They may be slightly dusty mornings after soccer matches. You're getting international market intelligence in real time with that same team. You've got the growth for both capital and revenue. And in that part really brings it all together as the qualitative reasons why you should also look at above the sheer market size itself.
I love it. There were heaps of stats in there, Paul.
I love stats.
Oh yeah, there are a few that you made me think of as well. So the UK ranks second for investment funding for early stage technology companies globally. I think the market, what size? 3 times larger than the Australian market. 500 million consumers across UK, Europe. Like, just phenomenal market size, to your point. Claudia, keen to hear from you why you looked at the UK instead of the US. And it comes on the back of a question in the chat window from Paul Mead. Hey, Paul, who was asking about, why do we look at the UK instead of the US? And he made some comments about the fact that depending what you're doing, US market is structured into state by state, almost, with different regulations and challenges. But what was your sort of thing with looking at the UK as distinct from the US, for example?
Yeah, so I liked Paul's sales pitch. It was great. Well done. But I guess more specifically for us, we went through the conundrum of where do you expand to and where do you go next? And the standard sort of one that comes up is the US, because it's closer and the time zone's not as grueling, to be fair, as it is in the UK. And it is bigger as a whole. So everyone naturally thinks we should go to the US next. I think it's really country specific, actually, and company specific in terms of what your dynamics are and where the target market sits and how your solution services it up on sort of a more granular level. For us, there was some really key considerations. So we are, as Paul said, a RegTech business. So the regulation, the AML specifically, so anti-money laundering legislation in the UK, which is actually Europe more generally. So although it's separate now, when the legislation was released, it does cover Europe. as market leading like it is in New Zealand. Australia lags a little bit behind, but they're working on it. So Australia has actually been a harder market for us compared to the UK, and the US is similar. So just from a regulation perspective, that was a key consideration that made the UK more attractive from our perspective, which is specific. Another specific reason which meant the UK was more appealing was, as I said, I lived there and worked there for 7 years, sort of on the fringe. So I worked for Experian, one of the big credit bureaus, and LexisNexis, who all operate in sort of the digital ID space. So I had a bunch of connections, understood the market very well. My business partner's British, so he's from Northern England originally. Spent most of his career in the UK. We both have passports. It just made that connection so much easier than having to, like the US, it was kind of like, where do you even begin and where do you start? And it's all very challenging. And then to all of Paul's stats, it's just on a more generalized basis, the culture's broadly the same. The language is the same. It's pretty easy to do business. The government connections are really close, so you get lots of support. In fact, we went on this trade visit with DIT, lots of doors were open, lots of introductions were made. We met Paul actually at one of the events, and he gave us lots of insights into the legal market, and that was one of the target markets that we were going after. So it's just, in terms of networks and connections, there's just so much to lean on because the governments are so tight. And then to your point also, Aaron, it's quite favourable from an investment perspective. So there's something called the VCT rules, which basically means that investors get a whole lot of tax breaks if they invest in startup businesses. So it makes it appealing, which means there's quite a bit of cash floating around and it's easier to get your hands on capital, and there's a big VC market. So, and then I guess broadly just London being the fintech hub, there's so much financial services that goes on. So if that is a market that you're going after, it's pretty appealing both from a talent perspective and an opportunity perspective. So that was our rationale behind the UK.
That obviously makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned there that UK and London in particular is that fintech hub, which sort of leads into this next question of, we're talking about the UK market as if it fits everyone, but is there anyone that shouldn't be looking at the UK? Are there particular sectors where other markets might make more sense? Or how does a company that's looking at the market weigh up where they should be heading next? And maybe as part of that, what are the particular verticals that are strong in the UK? Maybe Craig or Paul, if you want to just kick off with that perspective first.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. I think there's a few things just, in that question to unpack. And I think from a starting point, because of the distance, you really have to invest, the time to actually travel there and spend the time on the ground. I think that would be the first thing in terms of before you go down the line of looking at, which sectors are going to be successful and not. But it's from a first principles basis, who will it suit? A company that has the ability to spend the time understanding the market, spending the time physically in the market, getting to know individuals on the ground, working the networks, understanding the way in which business is done. So, a little bit of a nuance there. We always talk about, Brits that come over to Australia coming in reverse. The Brits will come here and, shake a few hands and have some meetings in Australia. And the Aussies will be very honest about whether the product is good or not. And if it's not good, they'll tell you to your face. You're like, oh, don't really like it. And it's great, thanks very much. But in Britain, we're quite polite. And that can be a frustration to Aussies going there, even if they spent the time to go there. And you might find that you've had 2 or 3 meetings with someone that's wonderful. What a great product. But actually they're thinking, just, to save face or to make sure they don't feel like they've done the wrong thing by investing the time in the UK, you might be strung along a bit. So I think there's cultural differences as well, just to be aware of before you take that leap of faith and do, fly across to the UK. That's why missions, such as Aaron's mission is one to consider, of course. In terms of what it does suit, though, getting back to the sectoral focus before I pass over to Paul, is something around, if you're going to succeed in the UK, there's absolutely some merit in capitalizing on the Aussie brand. I think that there's two schools of thought in this, but if it's a product which has been designed and built in Australia, you're already at a head start because it's a trusted country. Obviously, the language is not a barrier, but it's seen as a very creative, place where innovation's occurring. Australia might not think that, by the way, but the Brits do think that. They think it's a fantastic location where some of the latest tech innovations are occurring. So I'd capitalize on that brand narrative, and also obviously talk it up, talk how great the business is going in Australia. Talk about, Brisbane is a big place, Melbourne is a big place, Sydney is a big place. They're massive. In terms of city size, they're bigger than any UK city other than London. So it's worth capitalizing on that.
Craig, when you were talking about the politeness and the cultural difference of Brits, you made me question every compliment you've ever given me. But I'm joking. Paul, any other thoughts on who does the market suit and who doesn't it suit?
I think the first part on it suiting is you've got to have enough capital, working capital, to put one person on, at least one senior exec on international expansion. If you can't allocate that resource from head office momentum, then don't do it yet. Do the market gathering, do the intelligence trips. What are the big trade? I mean, even in government for New South Wales, we're still going because coming back into government, you cover every sector. So you've got to get as broad as you can. You've got to know which conferences and trade shows, which are thought leadership that you don't go selling at, and which ones actually go and invest in a stand and get presence to win market. I think that the first bit you can do lightly. So maybe phase one, intelligence gathering. But when you really step into international, I use the saying, remember how easy it was when you first created your business. And now you're going offshore and you don't have the markets. So don't think, oh, we're now doing okay, we'll launch to a new market. Think, holy crap, we're starting a new startup in a foreign country. Am I ready to put that energy and effort into it again? Would be my advice, because too many times I see it being an add-on. And I think when it's an add-on, and I know you got to have lean teams, and I know, okay, that you choose not to sleep. And I think I've seen Claudia and Russ go through the choose not to sleep phase. And you can get there. But if you say what would make it successful, when you've got enough free cash flow from the head office or investor support that you can make it a dedicated project that's funded, not 1 year, at least 2. 1 year will almost get you there, but you want to get to break even as fast as you can. But I think you're going to be doing 6 months of intelligence gathering and getting a pipeline that you then start thinking, but that may not land into cash flow into the second year. So that would be my first advice, is don't try to rush it too quick that you then end up retreating. And to give you a view, Airtasker has spent 18 million Aussie and retreated. And that's when you don't listen to the market, you don't do it right. And I'm not criticizing them, they've been very successful, but there's a lot to learn. If we don't learn from other entrepreneurs, good and bad, we're bound to follow in those issues. I do think the trip for market intelligence is really important. What is the language, the lingo, who else is in the market, who are the big players? Have they all been swept up because you've got an Experian who's saying there is no space, or actually can you bring value add to that conversation? How do they buy? Why is the procurement process different? What are their regulations? So in the UK, 25,000 is the smallest. They can do a single source without going through a whole bunch of paperwork, which you'll need to back them up on. To Craig's point, teach them to say no. One of my favorite Kiwi entrepreneurs, Frank Van de Velden, he would, from Touchpoint, he would absolutely say, if a Brit says, have a coffee, let me run it past someone else, that's a no. It's like, I'm taking you to a meeting with my boss is a yes. Anything less than that is a very polite no. I saw an email last week that was a full page for an investor to say to an Aussie scale up, no, it's not happening. It was amazing. And I goes, what's your interpretation? That's a no. And he's like, oh, but they've written all this in. No, it's a no. That's a no. I mean, Claudia and I have a shared advisor. I don't know if he set up your UK business. I think he did. He definitely did mine, an exceptional service. Paul Bear, have someone who will be on the phone 24/7. I think Paul's on this course. I'm going to call him out because he was exceptional from the word go. Explain your customers, your data points here in Australia and New Zealand. They don't know what they mean. If you say, I do FPOS, I am the sole supplier to FPOS, they'll go, uh-huh.
Totally
They have
true.
no idea what that means. So if you're doing, I'm the fintech, I'm the merchant facility behind AusPost. How many branches? Oh, I don't know. No idea what it means. You've got to explain how many touch points that is, how many customers that is, what is the turnover, what currencies are you working in? When you get to that point, it's not that they don't know, it's they've not been to the market. In the last 3 years, it's changed a lot. So just take yourself back and assume you're speaking to someone in Japan and that they know nothing about our market. Really get to that point of, I support CommBank or Auckland Saving Bank. They are the #1 in market. They have 28% market share of 28 million people. They have 10 million customers. They do X trillion in FX flow a year. Yeah, you've got to spell it out. So they would be my things on who is appropriate, but then what to think about when they come into that step.
That was fantastic, Paul. Lots in there about the resources you need to enter the market, the capital that's needed, the support, the connections. But one key takeaway I took from there was that being prepared to start all over again, and commit to that. Claudia, I'm super keen to hear, and well, for others to hear your journey. So that moment, maybe paint that picture first of what did Apply ID look like at the time you chose to expand to the UK, because you were dominating in New Zealand. And then if you could share some insights into that journey and start getting into the how as well.
Sure. So yeah, we started by knowing we wanted to go overseas, and we started in Australia because everyone in New Zealand tends to go to Australia because we're kind of one and the same, although we're different. And actually figured out that there were loads of nuances with Australia, with the regulation and the way that the business operates. And then we were like, okay, well, where else should we go? And it was really that the Department of International Trade trip that we did, or go and meet a whole bunch of people and do a bit of a research trip to understand the market dynamics and what it looks like. And we met a bunch of people, and we actually on that trip met Octopus Ventures, and they spoke about raising capital and how, a little bit like this, what a startup needs to look like to be ready to expand to the UK. And we listened and we had a chat, and then we went away, and then we came back and sort of built the business up in New Zealand and in Australia, and decided that we really did want to go to the UK. But to Paul's point, we weren't at a position at that stage where we had enough free cash flow kicking around. Early stage, growth tech business, you just reinvest everything into the core markets. How would we go about doing it? So we then decided to do a capital raise, and we actually appointed an M&A advisor to help us with that. Although my background is in that world, I was sort of reticent to do it, but ultimately it's a trade-off, I think, as a startup, because you're just so busy doing everything and trying to drive growth and manage the team that you can just spend so much time doing investor decks and just a lot of the administration that goes behind it. So we work with a New Zealand company called Clear Capital, and they went out and tapped all the different VCs and garnered interest and put the pitch deck and the forecast together and everything we needed for that, which was really useful. But because we had met Octopus, we weren't really looking for investors in the UK at that stage, to be fair. We were just looking in New Zealand and Australia, although we knew the UK was on our horizon. But because we'd met Octopus on our trip a year ago, we just tapped the guy that we met, Ed, on the shoulder and said, do you want to have a chat? And it was fortuitous because they were building out their New Zealand and Australia strategy at the time. It's funny how these things all come together. And so we ended up deciding that, given they were based in the UK and that's where our big growth market was going to be, that we would bring them on as our investors. And they actually introduced us to Aaron and Tribe, which was cool. So because we had a presence in Australia at the time, it was like, it'd be great to have some Australian VC support, open up some networks, give us some guidance. And so then we knew that Australia and the UK were the two markets we were going to be focusing on, and having investors in those markets was going to help with the growth and the trajectory and bring it all together. And so I guess we did it in a sense of getting capital first and then going to the UK, rather than dipping our toe in the water and putting a person and sort of doing it that way and doing it slowly. So then I think one of the key things to that, and coming back to what both Paul and Craig were saying, is you need to be committed to doing this. You can't just be like, oh, we'll just give it a go, especially with the UK, because the time zone is just so challenging. And yes, you can work all night, and people, are in the world of Zoom, but in terms of really getting under the bonnet of the market and understanding it and what's going on, you just need to be there, and you just need FaceTime. So with me having a young family, it's not really feasible for me to pick up and go, but luckily my business partner was able to and up for it. His family's in the UK. So he went for a year, for the first year, and built the team, really understood the market. I still went back and forth pretty regularly, because again, when you're a co-founding team and you make lots of decisions together and you bring different strengths, actually being 12 hours apart, 13 hours apart, it's quite hard to have the big strategic conversations around what you're learning and what's happening and making decisions. So still having the ability to go over and spend decent time with the team, with the customers, with the partners, understanding the market is really important. And you just have to be, committed to, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, and we're really going to go for it. And it's a big, it's a big effort and it's a big slog, but you learn and you grow and you adapt, and it's a huge opportunity. So I think if you're sitting in Aussie or New Zealand thinking, do we want to do this? I think absolutely, the opportunity is huge and the market's there. You've got to be ambitious and you've got to be gutsy and you've got to be really willing to work hard and travel, because it's just sort of the way it goes. I mean, and again, to Paul's point, it really is like starting again. So, the language is different. Although you think the culture's the same, the nuances are very different in terms of the way that the market interprets things, what the competitive landscape looks like, how your verticals speak. It is all still different, and you are starting again. And yes, you might have a whole bunch of reference customers, but they don't really mean anything in the UK because it's hard for customers to put context around it. So you just have to hustle, like you did in your first market that you started in. So that would be my sort of experience and guidance.
Yeah, you just touched on something that was one of the questions in the chat window, is how similar are your UK customers to your Australian customers? And is it copy and paste, or are there clear differences? And do you have to refine that market fit all over again? What was your experience, Claudia?
So, there's definitely similarities, but there's also nuances. So the customers that we're going after are similar, I would say. The way that so the regulation, although it's similar in its AML, New Zealand really leads with biometrics, and so facial biometrics for ID verification and onboarding. Whereas the UK, although the legislation is very advanced from an anti-money laundering perspective, the adoption of biometrics in some verticals is advanced and in others is just lagging so far behind. So there's a fair amount of, and which is different. So we operate in the financial services space, they're very advanced, they use biometrics a lot, it's quite a competitive space. But then in the professional services, it's still a lot further behind, and they're still doing just, a pretty manual check. So that was interesting. I think the other thing that we really learned was the go-to-market strategy is completely different. So in somewhere like New Zealand, Australia might not be as bad, but it's probably still quite similar. And that, you can have quite an outbound approach. It's quite, you sort of know who the key players are. It's your home territory. It's quite easy to, tap people up and open doors and networks. Whereas in the UK market, given it is so big and so vast and a lot more, there's lots of players in the space, you need to have a different approach and a different go-to-market strategy. So we were much more outbound sales led in New Zealand and Australia, whereas in the UK, we really needed to build an inbound marketing engine because the market is just so much more receptive to that than they were an outbound strategy, which was a big learning curve for us. And it took a bit of time to sort of figure that out. But yeah, it's just, I don't know if you can learn that without actually just experiencing it and being on the ground. I don't know if you can learn it just by market research, and things that probably seem obvious. You kind of just need to get your hands dirty and figure it out by experience.
Yeah, I think so. And there's heaps in there I'd like to unpack. You mentioned some things around managing your co-founder relationship over time zones and everything else. And I think that's probably something we should do in another chat, because that's something I'd like to get into. But let's do some rapid fire, some quick tips around the practical how. And Paul, you fired off a heap before, but let's just talk structurally. So building on what you just said, Claudia, and Paul, what you said before, it's like you need boots on the ground. You need resources in market. Is that a fair call? Like, you've got to be willing to commit human resources
I'd add
into the
something
market?
to that though. I think you need someone from head office. So I think, sure, having hiring people is important, but I think that you need to either have a co-founder or a senior exec from here, home, that goes over, because I think you need to have that link and knowledge into the business and the culture and who you guys are and how you operate, rather than just hiring someone cold when you're trying to start afresh. Would be my recommendation from what I've experienced.
Yeah, I've heard similar. Paul and Craig, would you agree with that? It's better to send someone who has that intimate knowledge of the business?
I'd say there's a lot of considerations around picking your champion. So is it someone that knows the business well, that's grown up in the business, has been in the business for some time and is your champion? Or are you picking, someone in the foreign country because that's what you need? You need someone that can open doors and have those connections as well. So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. And I think it totally depends on what you're doing and how far down the line you are in terms of your maturity. But there was just a couple of really good points that were made there. I think in terms of the how, and I can see a question in the chat there around conferences as well, like, should you go to conferences? Are conferences the magnet, or the event that leads you to make the decision to at least explore the market? I think maybe to answer that one first, conferences, they're pretty useful actually, and depending upon what the conference is, where it's located, which customers are there, which competitors are going to be there, if it aligns in some way to what you've already worked out, like if you're a startup or a scale up or a generic company, what does your business lean canvas tell you? What are you trying to do and execute in the next 6 months to a year? And if that is to understand your competitors, their pricing for something that you might have a similar pricing mechanism before, but you need to test it, the conferences are pretty useful, because not only do you get to see the shop fronts as to what's available in country, but you do get to press the flesh a bit, test the market without having a stand there, meet people informally outside of the conference, and then tag alongside other opportunities as well. Everybody that is leaving from Australia to go to the UK to test the market generally will have family there, or a mate there, or a couch they can sleep on as well. And tapping into those networks obviously is something really important to do. And you can do that through LinkedIn as well, and people that you went to school with probably had some time there or are still there. Like me, I've done it in reverse. I mean, there's countless people that knock on my door and say, hey, you're still over there, brilliant, let's catch up. So I think the how is using your own personal networks, using the missions, looking at conferences, and the mateship network as well. I'll leave it there.
Paul, you raised something before around IP. You mentioned it in the opening remarks. Something that founders often don't think of. Can you just expand on that? What does a founder need to be thinking of in terms of their IP entry in a new market?
Firstly, you're opening a big new world, and that someone may have a very similar brand or somewhere in one of the markets. So something I say to entrepreneurs is, fast forward 5 to 10 years from now, which markets would 80% of your revenue or profit come from? And if you're thinking like that far ahead, you should be protecting at least your brand, name and logo, but obviously you can change your logo if something's too similar. And particularly on patents. I mean, if you've gone to the wonderful energy to create a patent, you need to lock it down before you go offshore, and that's somewhere in about the $80,000 mark. So these are patents are not small investments, but they give you a USP, so it's absolutely worth that time and energy. Branding, unfortunately, about once a year, I would find an Antipodean business who comes to an international trade show, great product, whether a good or a service, and they haven't trademarked the business and they've put it in front of 30,000 people walking the floor. They're doing sales, and all someone else has to do, because given it's their first time in market, is go and set up a web page and say, I started marketing that brand before them, log it into the UK Intellectual Property Office, and they would have first dibs on that brand in this market. It's not expensive. You can do it yourself for about £600, or get a lawyer to do it for between $1,500 and $2,500 for a brand IP. My own company, when I did it, I had to defend it 3 times. So, and that kept the people trying to come into my space with that brand off my patch. I've seen it on drinks where someone had a fantastic logo. I was like, wow, you got a lot of interest, not registered. And I was like, well, what are you doing? You've come with your logo under an international trade fair with your logo not protected, and everyone loves it. So guess what's happening in the next 2 weeks? Someone else has gone, scoured the market and probably stolen that great name from you. So there's really simple things, and this is why the advisors are really good. Government agencies will help you with the free information. They won't do it for you, but they will give you that steer of what you need to do. And what you can do, cash flow is always tight in your growth phase. No matter how much your revenue is or how much you're scaling, there's always something to put your money into. So you can segment and break down what you need to do. So before you go to market, get your UK company, get your IP protected, you have your registered address, and at that point you can sit back for a year or two. You've got the infrastructure ready. You can just sit. When you're ready, go to the next step. So it's important about segment the growth journey. It's not all at once. It doesn't have to be a big bang. If you're thinking about it, do those 3 steps. You need a registered office to get your company. You can get them very cheap. From the company, very quick, and from the intellectual property office, you can do it yourself or pay a lawyer to make sure it's done 100% correctly. So that's the easiest thing to do. Then wait and move to the next step. To the points everyone else has raised, executive, I 100% agree. You need to be able to negotiate. I do think, to Claudia's point, having the founder who can get into the depths of the technical, talk about the commercial and the operational is so valuable in a negotiation that they take you seriously. You do need to check that your contract is fit for this market. So I talked about get the company, get the IP. When you're thinking about coming into the sales pipeline, have a lawyer review your Australian New Zealand contract. You don't need them to start from scratch, because they'll charge you 3 times as much for the same outcome. Just make your existing contract, Claudia, it would be good to get your view on this one, but make your contract fit for purpose so that if you do get a sale, you can execute quickly. Also, the other reason for an executive is you need to fight for internal resource, and ensuring there's an executive that's putting equal weight on the international growth is as much as a conversation you'll be having with internal resource allocation and investors as you will with external clients. So it's a double hat. Finally, the thing I would push is the Antipodeans. Smaller markets mean you fight harder, and that means our service is quite exceptional. And you don't realise that till you get here. There's things we take for granted, like I talked about, the New South Wales driver's license app is fantastic. There's things we do which we just think of course you do that. That's the right thing to do, not over here. I'll give you the challenge question. When you deal with a recruitment agent, how many of them are Brits? right? They're into that hard sales commission culture. That's something a part of this society has that in Australia and New Zealand go, oh, it's a bit ugly, a little bit salesy. They are like that. So there's two prongs to it. One, your service culture from down under is a huge asset over here. Secondly, watch who you get in your supply chain, because they're really good at selling to you. And then when it comes to follow up, contract management is a much bigger deal here than it is down under, because people tend to do what they say. We also have the section 52, 53 misleading and deceptive. I really wish they'd invent a law over here on that, but they don't. So you can walk past the shop window and be told something that it will do this and it is this, and their sales service won't manage it. So you've got to be tough on your supply chain contract management here as well, but also use that to your advantage. Your service is your specialization over here.
Lots of good tips in there and steps to take. And we haven't touched on things like bank accounts or visas or a dozen other things, but rather than get into that, you touched on then, Paul, get the right help around you. Who are the groups or who are the people that founders should be connecting with? So we've mentioned UKDIT. Obviously, your role with the New South Wales Trade Investment Team as the commissioner based in London is fantastic. But who else? Who are the trusted people that we can be going to? Maybe Claudia, if you want to share from your experience, those groups that you've used.
Sure. So we've leaned on those groups. If you're based in New Zealand, NZTE is fantastic. I can't actually speak more highly about them, the support that they give you in country, but also from home, and investment and bits and pieces is great. There's something called London Partners, which we've not done a lot with, but we were introduced to them when we were there. Paul's right, and that Paul Bear is fab, so he helped us out a lot. He always tells me off because I always thought that he just helps with the financial side of things, but actually he can help with all of the contracts and employment contracts and all of those bits and pieces, which we should have leaned on Paul a lot more than we did. But when you're sort of doing things in a hurry, we just kind of missed that, and I take full responsibility. But if you do use Paul, he's got a broad offering. We used a platform so we signed up with Employment Hero, which is an Aussie-based HR system because they operate in all three markets. So we just pulled all of our employment contracts and did all of our HR through that. But we still need to use Paul for the bank account stuff, because bank accounts, I'm sure anyone that wants to go to the UK will just know that it's a bit of a standing joke at the moment. It's near on impossible to get one. I mean, we've been in market for a year and we still don't have one. So we actually just have a Wise account, which you can do like pretty much everything you need to. You can't pay pensions, so you can't pay super through it. So we still do rely on our accountant through Paul to do that for us on a trust accounting basis. But you can do most other things, which gets, it's pretty easy to get up and running while we plod away trying to get a bank account in the UK. And so from a contract perspective, we just used our New Zealand law firm to help us. They had connections into an Australian law firm and a UK law firm. So we had to do a review of our contract, but also our privacy policy from a GDPR perspective. So we got it all sort of updated in New Zealand. And when I say updated, we pretty much started from scratch, because I think the one that we had just wasn't very fit for purpose. So it was easier to just take a new version and go for it. It was a pretty expensive and cumbersome process, but it's something you just have to do. Because especially in our world where we're dealing with finance organizations and law firms, and they want to get right into when we're dealing with personal information. So it's pretty critical that you get that stuff right. What else? I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah.
From our perspective.
There's some good names in there. Paul, Craig, any others that you'd add to the list quickly?
I'll jump in quickly, Paul, because I need to jump on another call in about 5 minutes. So apologies, everyone. But I'll just say, get New South Wales, Trade and Investment Queensland, DIT, to publish the lists of the companies that have been supported. So there's case studies on them, but all those companies that have set up in the UK and have an operational presence there, get those lists, contact the founders, search on LinkedIn, find out who's actually has a presence on the ground there, and just say, hey, I'm an Aussie too, I'm coming over. So that's something to do. The other thing my boss did was turn up in London with a backpack and just walked in, knocked on the door of Queensland House and said, I'm from Queensland. What do you guys do? And she talks about this a lot, and they bent over backwards for her, literally. Set her up with a little office in there for, I think, 4 weeks. But yeah, I mean, go and track Paul down, knock on his door. He'll take you out for a beer. I'm absolutely sure, no question of that. So there's a good good group of people on the ground there that can absolutely help you, and it doesn't just stop at Queensland House and the Australian High Commission, but you've got Scottish Development International, you've got Marketing Birmingham, you've got a Friends of Queensland LinkedIn group, which I think TIQ manage in London. There's a British Business Network LinkedIn group as well. So there's a whole range of different places you can go and unearth good connections and contacts.
Mm.
And it's so true. You just have to hustle all of those networks, and you have to just make yourself present and be a part of them and say yes to things and turn up, because you never know what it's going to turn into, really.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out in international trade and investment, exporting from one market, it normally requires a setup that we've touched on, being boots on the ground. That's inward investment in the other. So both sides of the coin want to see you succeed. So, and that doesn't matter where you go in the world, you get the same response. From New South Wales point of view, we have export teams. We have a digital one, we have health specific ones, we have infrastructure. So in that regard, you get bespoke programs run for you. You get funding support to go to certain conferences and trade shows, and that tends to tell you what works, because government will put their money where outcomes are expected, and the outcomes being helping you get more sales. Because if we can't generate more sales for you, that increases your headcount. It's not a charity. We need to drive tax revenue from it. We want to get an outcome. So actually there is a drive that you want to follow government, because they're going to tell you where they're going to probably get their return on investment. And that's you creating jobs. So, and you ain't going to create jobs if you get growth. So definitely leverage both sides of the coin. For us, Investment New South Wales, we work with Austrade very well. It's very complementary. One will run a path maybe in a different segment, or they might run the first module. We might run a more advanced module later in the year. It's very complementary. I know, Claudia, the NZTE guys are absolutely brilliant. In fact, we're hosting them on Thursday night, so that's how close we are in our communities over here. So I definitely reach out. To Craig's point, those receiving locations will also try to fight for your business. So then you can say, well, you're not going to get a lot, so I don't want to raise expectations, but you might get $2,000 for this, or 5K, or the free hot desk, or so. I mean, it's worth looking across the entire United Kingdom. You will probably find you say London and the UK interchangeably. There's more to it. There's easier ways, lower salaries, but smaller markets. But if you want to get into, for example, Liverpool, it's 1 million people, you can really push that. If you're in creative and gaming, you'll get talent, you'll get moving. To Claudia's or Craig's point, for people with a backpack who rock up, we actually have our full facilities of the New South Wales facilities. We have the Waratah boardroom for your pitching. You can come and pitch to your clients in the room, host them, do webinars. We can leverage Australia House with Austrade, so you can do a product launch inside Australia House. We can also have hot desks. So when you go to, today I haven't got many meetings. Do you mind if I stop and work in? Absolutely not. If you're from New South Wales, we're here on the ground to help you succeed. Paris, Berlin, London, just shout and we're here to guide you and support you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's so true. In our experience with the missions as well, all of the state officers have been incredibly supportive. Craig, I know you have to go, so I want to say thank you for dialing in. I know you have to jump on another call, but appreciate it.
Thanks all.
Maren, just in terms of the trade missions, just thinking of the other partners that we have help us as well. I think Claudia mentioned London Partners, but do you have some of those other names that we've plugged companies into at different points? And I do want to give a shout out to Western Australian government who funded 10 places on the last mission, and Charlotta and the team were amazing in terms of supporting as well. But we also get support from Tech Nation and others when we're on the ground.
Yeah, so Tech Nation are definitely a really great connector, also helping with visa questions and, what opportunities exist for Australians to come and explore the UK in the way that Claudia described at your early stages. We have connections with Bridgehead, who help with go-to-market strategies and the marketing and growth within a new market. We do have connections to HR and talent specialists who really can help with the acquisition of talent and a lot of the HR questions that come up within the UK. Some rules and regulations are similar, but there's also some key differences that is really important to be aware of. London and Partners, Claudia, you mentioned already as well. We also have some great connections to accountants and tax advisors to really help set up a business structure that is beneficial. And, these are really important considerations to make. And this is probably what feels most daunting, and where you sort of get that mindset of, oh my God, where do I start? And Claudia, this is something that you described as well in relation to if you had gone to the US, you would have been in that scenario of where do we even start? And I think this is where our missions come in and are extremely valuable, because we do help with those connections that were just mentioned. And, what Craig and Paul, what you're talking about, the connections, one is those specialists and professionals that we help connect founders with to really help with the nitty-gritty bits of how do I set up a bank account, what does my legal structure need to look like, but also helping to make those connections to government representatives of the different Australian states, and really connecting founders and businesses to that amazing support system that's available. But you only know what you know, and unless you're introduced, you can't make those connections. So I think this is where our missions are extremely valuable, because we guide the participants to those meetings and to those networking events.
I think the other thing, there's nothing like drinking beer or having a dinner and actually building that social connection, like that Aussie mafia that exists in market as well, that you guys pointed out. We are coming up towards time, so if anyone does have any final questions for the panel, I'd love you to just drop them in the chat window. But one thing just to sort of finish on around, because all of you mentioned the role of these exploratory or intelligence missions into market, and Claudia, you went through one of the DIT ones. What are the tips? You go on one of these missions. What are your tips for getting the most out of them? Claudia, maybe kicking off with you, and then Paul, I might go to you for not just tips of getting the most out, but mistakes you see people make on those trips too. But Claudia, any tips?
So it just sort of comes back to the general theme, but I think to get the most out of it, make sure you talk to the people that are relevant. There's lots of different events that are put together, and you need to go and talk to the people that are hosting them and have a chat and put yourself out there and ask questions that you need to get to the bottom of, and build those relationships, and then follow up and connect with them, and make sure that you keep that connection going. Paul, we met Paul, and then he came out to New Zealand and we caught up, and it was great. Likewise with Octopus, who's now our investors, we went up and had a chat to them at the end, and we sort of made that connection. So then a year later, when we got in touch, they remembered who we were, and it sort of goes from there. It's all about those touch points and having those conversations. I mean, it was a really cool event we went to. We went to Royal Bank of Scotland and Barclays Innovation Centre and Visa Innovation Centre, and then you learn a bit about the regions, and they hosted some regional events, and it's just you just got to go to everything, and even something that you think, maybe this won't be that relevant for me, you turn up and there might be someone there that actually you hadn't expected to meet that has a negative information or an intro to someone. It's just kind of how it flows. Be my advice.
Yeah, I would definitely double down on that last one in particular, that I've seen a lot of participants on these missions sort of say, oh, I'm not going to go to this event because it's not for me. And they sort of prejudge it and rule it out, but they end up going, and it's actually the key moment of the week where they meet someone they didn't expect to meet, that, you know, it's a transformational moment. But I think your other point around following up, like it takes action, right? It takes a lot of follow up and staying in touch and maintaining that relationship. Paul, any tips from yourself, those coming over on trade delegations or missions, tips and mistakes you see people make?
The first one is prep and plan. So when I say prep, let's get the company, the trademark registered. You can start that now. It'll land by Easter. So when you start reaching out, Europeans need more notice. Very rarely you're walking just into a meeting. Politely, minimum 2 weeks out, you might get in their diary. Realistically, think 6 to 8 weeks minimum for meeting, particularly on the continent. Actually, more northern, Swiss, German, and northern, 8 weeks minimum. If you want to be in their diary, 8 weeks. Like we did an event 4 or 5 weeks notice, that's rushing in Germany. So, you know, just to put that in perspective. In the UK, it's a little bit more flexible, but I would suggest you do that. Craig touched on Sweat LinkedIn, absolutely. Get your digital meetings in their time zone. Don't expect anyone to be getting up morning late for you. You're pitching to them, not the other way around. You have the coffee, you do the late night. Get the digital meetings out of the way because you'll harvest some of the noise out of the way. Get the jargon, read their press. What is their trade press? Get it online, get their jargon, understand. I mean, particularly in Claudia's world, what's the legislation called? What are the acronyms they're using? Get into the jargon as much as you can, particularly if this is your first Intel trip. Do a lot of research. Maybe get an intern in to do who are the top 20 players, suppliers, etc. Tech Week is great. It's very big. I wouldn't make it my sole purpose of a trip for 5 days. Trips should be longer. I know sometimes entrepreneurs, families, school holidays, it is really tough. Straddle one weekend, go for 2. And the reason I say that is you'll normally find with Tech Week, there is a sector-specific conference somewhere very near Europe. So in that regard, try to find, for example, Money 2020, exactly the week before, UK Digital Manufacturing Week, the week before. Straight after we finish at Tech Week, we have Paris Air Show, one of the biggest military air shows. So find out what it is you're working in. If you have the resource and the time, I'd actually say do a 1 week fly in, fly out to get the language, the lingo, network, find the maps, meet all the trade agencies, then come back for the big London Tech Week in June. That would be my way to play it. For those who are coming back for the 2nd or 3rd time, I have the New South Wales firms asking about what do we do this summer. Last year was their Intel trip. They came for that Money 2020, straddled the weekend into London Tech Week, got back. I've now said come for a month. And that is because they're going to come. We're going to do a bunch of meetings before they arrive or do some more peripheral conferences. Then they're going to do a hardcore BD week around London and UK. Money 2020, immediately back Money 2020 Thursday night to be back in London to sweat meetings Friday, because you will not get in people's diaries during London Tech Week. It is not a week for meetings, it's a week for networking. So if you then come in Monday and fly out Friday, you won't get any local follow-up. So then they're staying the week after London Tech Week as well. But all of that meeting that's more your evolution of quick and dirty, at least straddle one weekend and then going into multi-weeks. And then you get to the point where it's almost every 6 weeks. If you can't relocate fully, it's investing in the airfare and the jet lag to go, you're saying, if I'm here now, I know no one's going to meet me in the last 2 weeks of December, but I can say I'll see you in the 2nd or 3rd week of January. Great. And then I'll see you in the beginning of March. And then I straddle Easter and I come back on the other side of Easter. And then I'm back for June Tech Week. That's when you've got a real good sales pipeline. That's the least you should be doing to execute. Going back, Paul Bear backed up what Claudia and I said, which was boots on the ground from an executive leads to faster, more sustainable outcomes, i.e. break even as fast as possible. And that's your number one goal. Then you can take your time.
Yeah, tons of great advice in there, and completely agree. We structure our missions around London Tech Week, but end up doing most of non-London Tech Week things and encouraging participants to take a week of free airtime for the week afterwards for everyone that they meet during the week to have that time. And another one that lots of participants for us attended this year was SASTA in Barcelona, which was a bit earlier, but then they bridged their time through to the UK. But yeah, tons of really good points in that.
Probably one thing I would say, Aaron, is don't come to do business in about the third week of July until the first week of September. That's the 20th of December to Australia Day, Waikiki Day. You got, or Waitangi Day, I think it is it called? There you go. There's that public holiday where you go, no one's coming in. You bring them in from their summer holiday, you're going to get irritated. So for us, we literally almost don't travel from the second week of July to the first week of September. The only conference of value in that period is Gamescom in Cologne in the third week of August. Other than that, I don't know why you'd be in Europe. And I'm going to really challenge you when you say, oh, I'm coming for a business trip. That's like someone from Britain coming to Australia in Christmas and New Year and going, junket.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
One thing I would add to the mission prep, sorry, Aaron.
Yeah, go for it.
Is to do some really good goal setting before the mission as well, being really clear what you want to get out of that mission. There's a lot happening within 1 week, and the clearer you can be on what it is that you want to achieve within that week, but then also being really clear on what you're selling, what is your business pitch. There's a lot of networking taking place, so getting across really clearly what it is that you are doing, what it is that you're offering, and making that really memorable, I think is really key. But then talking to the other cohort participants as well and sharing with them what it is that you want to get out of the mission, because there's only so many connections you can make. But if everyone else in the cohort knows what it is that you're looking for, they can then start connecting you with others that they may have met and that you didn't meet as well. So yeah, to Paul and Claudia's point, it's all in the prep, but also being really clear on what it is that you want to get out of those missions.
I think that last point you made is really spot on, the value of going as a cohort. And I mean, we spend a lot of time making sure everyone in the cohort knows everyone else so that they can make those dashes across the room to introduce someone they just met that they know is of value to another participant. But that cohort is often the lasting legacy that comes back home as well. Like that group then stays connected for faster laps of learning. So they're really good points. So Claudia, do you have something you were going to add then?
Nope, I'm good.
So there's just a question there from Liz, if there will be a recording available. So yes, we did record the session. So thanks for dialing in. But yes, we will record the session and send that out to participants. I am very conscious of time. We have gone over. There was a ton of golden nuggets in there. I think one thing, just listening to all of this, one thing I would love to do for everyone is actually extract a lot of those key points you made and actually put them into a bit of a document as well. So a short form doc for those that don't have the time to sit and listen to the video recording. So I'll do that afterwards as well. But I really want to thank everyone for their time. Maren, just to close out though, I think the quick 30-second elevator pitch for our London mission next year. Do you want to give the pitch for participants? What are we doing and how can they find out more?
Yeah, sure. So from the 11th to the 17th of June, we are taking a group of Australian New Zealander founders to the UK during London Tech Week. We have 30 plus curated events that we are hosting and co-hosting, but of course there'll be 300 plus events taking place across the city. We'll be looking at the regions. We'll be getting into those connections, networks, really into some workshops, how to set up, what do you have to do next, helping with market exploration. And of course, to your point, it's all about the group, it's all about the cohort, taking that anxiety and the fear of having to do it alone. Logistically, we'll map it all out and we'll have a lot of fun in between as well. So we do on the Tribe Global website, we do have a link to our mission. So that is available. And we will share a link with everyone on the webinar as well, with a full itinerary and a lot more information.
Thank you. Awesome. I'm going to stay on the line for a little bit. If anyone does have any follow-up questions, I'll actually open up the room if I can, where we can all chat. But Paul and Claudia and Maren, I do want to be respectful of your time and just say thank you so much for dialing in. I will be sharing your details, Paul, with the group for those of our participants that are based out of New South Wales. And again, particularly Paul for dialing in so early in the morning. And Claudia, as always, for just being awesome and being part of this. Thank you very much.
If anyone wants to follow up and have a chat with me as well, just
Oh, great.
no problem.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, that'd be fantastic. Well, thank you, panelists. If you need to jump off, please do. I'm going to stay on and just answer any final questions, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Maren.
Thanks, Paul. And for participants, I'm going to see if I can actually open this up so that if you would like to chat, you're able to. So I'll just see if I can do that for you, but I might not be able to. But you can also raise your hand, and at that point, I can also add you through. But if any of you need to dial, disconnect at this point, obviously welcome to as well. And if anyone is interested in contributing to the conversation, feel free to share any insights you gained, or if any of you do have your own experience expanding into the UK or other markets, please feel free to share them as well.
And I have just shared our registration page for the London Mission 2023 in the chat. So that's the Yuli page that I've dropped in there. We have an itinerary and registration details there. We are running an early bird special until the 30th of November. So anyone who is keen, it would be a good advantage to go and register earlier rather than later.
Thank you. Awesome. Well,
Are
hey,
you
Liz.
guys able to hear me? Yeah, great.
Yes.
I'm so sorry I was late jumping on, Aaron. I got caught on another call.
No problem at all.
I suppose one of the things I just wanted to test briefly with you guys was the mission. You know, I know you do great missions. I just was wondering, obviously there's quite a strong focus on founders and investors. Is it also, you know, are you also seeking someone like me who works with multiple founders? Because yeah, I'm certainly very interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know my passion for getting more of our ecosystem leaders and those that help founders over to build these connections, because people such as yourself are the multipliers. So yeah, 100%. I think the interesting thing of the UK market in particular for me is they have some amazing programs and ecosystem activities that we can actually learn from. And very similar to I think you'd know I'm kind of anti-Silicon Valley in a lot of ways in terms of ecosystem stuff, but I think the UK has some quite healthy aspects of their ecosystem that we can learn from. So yeah, absolutely. Short answer is absolutely, Liz. I'd love you there. It'd be great.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Aaron. And yeah, I will definitely forward the information to, you know, there's about 3 or 4 really good tech companies that you would be aware of that, you know, are looking to launch in the UK in the next year. So I'll definitely forward the details through to them.
Yeah, awesome. That'd be great. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks very much. And I'll look forward to getting the recording so I can listen to what I missed and the brief. That'll be great.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'll shoot that through. So participants should receive that by, I think, tomorrow. I'll have it done. So yeah, that'll be up there shortly. And I do, for anyone that's actually interested in jumping on now, I can share this screen, which just has the mission QR code up there. So if anyone does want to scan the QR code to jump through to the mission page, that you're more than welcome to use your phone on that one. Any other quick questions? I know most people have jumped off now. But otherwise, I think we might call it quits if everyone's happy. Great.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Maren.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.